I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. This has been the culmination of a 3-day event, starting on Thursday night with several of you in the room, meeting in groups, talking about potential visioning for the Tukwila International Boulevard. This work would not have been possible without your participation and sharings of what your feelings are about the boulevard and the community around it. I want to thank the CNU team. They were back here in May discussing they'll be back in May discussing the final presentation that they're going to give you an introduction to this evening. And they'll be having a full board meeting on the CNU symposium at Benaroya Hall in May 3rd, 4th, and 5th. This city report will be shared at the Benaroya Hall at that CNU symposium, and the region will see the results of the work that you contributed to. I would expect some additional meetings to be held and some open houses come in the fall so that we can continue to explore what we've started to learn. So I'd like to thank some of the people who've been involved with this, including the Congress for New Urbanism, CNU. Lynn Richards, President and CEO. Is she with us? There she is. Hi, Lynn. Welcome. Thank you. And Kirsten Dunfrey, our main coordinator. Hey, there she is right there. All right. King County Green Tools Program for their financial support to make this happen.
Hey, thank you, Patty.
Thank you. And the city's partner in making this understood, well-respected, and sustainable information that they can share and collaborate with others. The CNU project team was headed up by Susan Henderson. Thank you, Susan. Hazel Boris from Placemakers. Hazel, where you at? There she comes. All right, thank you. Thank you. We have architect Steve Muzun from Muzun Design. Steve. Thank you, Steve. And Andre von Mauer Andrews from Andrews University and a student, Feek. All right, very good. Civic engineering was inclusive of Paul Crabtree of the Crabtree Group. Paul, thank you. Our marketing housing analysis was Laura Volk. She's hiding out somewhere. And then retail marketing analyst, Bob Gibbs. Very good. So we had, thank you. We had retail, we had streets, we had design, we have architecture, all coming together for this opportunity for us to explore what the Tukwila International Boulevard could become. I want to thank staff. They spent countless hours with the folks I mentioned. And we can't forget where we're at today, the church by the side of the road, them hosting us and being a part of this community as well. So thank you, church by the side of the road. And last but not least, I'd also like the team from Indio Slate and the Vive HTC VR virtual reality product. They've been working to create Tukwila in a virtual world. And if you have some time, step behind the curtain and check it out. With that, I will thank you, and I'll turn this back over to Susan for some comments.
Thank you, sir.
Just go a little bit.
I just also want to say there's two things, and we do these all over the world, and I don't know if it's just Washington or if it's the Seattle region, or if it's only Tukwila, but you guys are, I mean, you, not only are you just like super nice and have been so kind to us, normally processes like this can get contentious, but I just have to say the civil respect that you show each other and people of different opinions and those of us who are outsiders, you guys really have been amazing in our experience, and we've done a lot of these. And then I also want to say we've worked with some awesome elected officials and staffs all over the world, but Lynn and I have been talking, it's like the level of understanding of smart growth principles, good urbanism, and what it takes to actually transform your environment. The level of knowledge from your mayor to your council, all your council people, to every single one of your staff. You have some of the most enlightened public safety employees, both police and fire, that we know. And honestly, every single department, frequently when we ask for department directors to come, they'll show up for 30 minutes at the very beginning and then they don't come back. Your staff has been with us this entire time. And so I just want you as citizens of the community of Tukwila to know that you are incredibly fortunate. And you may know that very well already, but just in case you didn't, we think you're lucky. So I'll try to be brief. There's a whole lot of content. As you know, the project has been tagged TIB Rising. The hashtag on Twitter, and there's been good conversation there, is TIB Rising, so please stay engaged. I just want to show these couple of slides again at the very beginning. We looked at them when we began on Thursday, but this statement is straight out of your comprehensive plan about your vision for the boulevard. And there are a few things here that are very crystal clear, and you can only get there, and there aren't multiple routes to arriving at this sort of a built environment. And the fact that you say you want cultural diversity, authenticity, and a walkable Main Street, those things are very unique physical form. And so to arrive at that, the nice thing is it's not like 37 decisions you have to make. There's like 2 or 3 decisions you have to make. And the really powerful thing that we've heard from you all from the very first night to every one of your senior staff and your elected officials is we believe in that vision. Whatever it takes, we want to support that vision. So, vision sometimes isn't supported by political will or by public will. And once again, I just have to congratulate you on the fact that you actually believe in your own vision. And it's made our job a whole lot easier. So here's what we have today. And it's a pretty typical suburban commercial corridor. The sad thing is, with the exception of very unique, culturally diverse uses, retail uses, this physical environment could be anywhere in North America. It's not indicative of the diversity and the richness of your local culture. But you told us, and we looked at these corridors in the region as aspirational on Thursday. We took a tour with staff. And so this sort of a Main Street environment has been the goal of this entire process. So you began with us. You have been phenomenally well engaged. Every meeting we've held has had about 10 times as many people as we actually anticipated. And you've given us very clear direction to the point of your high school kids are telling us things like, we want a greater diversity of housing type. They sound like they've been to planning school already. So you've given us a very clear and actionable direction, which has really made our job easy. The very first thing that you told us is respect our vision. We believe in it. We really do want a walkable Main Street. And so that really helped us stay on target. And many times when we'd come up to a difficult decision, we would ask the people at the table, this is what's required to achieve your vision. Is it what you want to do? And the answer was always yes. We know it has hurdles. We know it has a price to pay, both in thought process and in infrastructure changes, but we believe in the vision, so protect it. So this is a little case study that Lynn Richards shared with us. It's from a town in California, Lancaster, who went through a very similar situation as you. In that they had, can you see that? Okay. This was the before. CNU went and began to help them. And they had a very disinvested little downtown, 5-lane commercial, arterial, and a lot of empty storefronts. And after their infrastructure investment, which involved additional on-street parking, additional landscaping, street trees, and signage and lighting, and a lot of the things that you all have done already, like with the wider sidewalks and the lighting, this is what it looks like today. And they had an interesting scenario where they actually put diagonal parking in the middle of the street, and now they close it down for major events, for festivals, and it has been phenomenally successful. And so here's just a little bit of data to encourage you that the hard work you're doing today is worth it. For Lancaster, I'm going to read this, 280 million economic revenue generated in 3 years. 9.53% increase in downtown property values. So it's not just for the city, but the property owners are benefiting from those investments as well. 52 new businesses generated in the course of 3 years' time after that investment. So often, public investment is really the seed for private investment, and the one always follows the other. So to get to that investment, the single most important thing is changing the character of the street itself. And right now you have a overly fast 5-lane, really it was a former highway until you took control of it again. So the most important first step is to change it from 5 lanes of auto only to thinking about the cyclist and the pedestrians and the businesses and making it act like civic infrastructure rather than just having a single purpose, and that is to move cars. So we've been talking to all of your transit partners, and the multimodal solutions, even if you take it from the 5 travel lanes to 3, we're adding 2 new bike lanes, we're adding on-street parking that supports retail. So instead of being a one problem solution, it becomes a multi-problem solution. It really can become a place-making solution. So there's a couple of options that Paul has developed with his team. The first is with protected bike lanes that would be between the sidewalk and the parked cars. And the other one would be an unprotected bike lane that would be painted on the outside of the parked cars. There's lots of different conditions in which one would be slightly better than the other, but it's basically the same striping. And so your engineering, your public works and engineering will be working on which of those solutions is the most appropriate where. The next thing you told us very clearly was protect our cultural diversity. It's our largest asset. And so Andrew and his team worked really carefully to start looking at the uses that are already amazing assets. They're not known to anyone except locals. So it's not building a tremendous amount of economic benefit to the community as a whole and to the city, because it's kind of unseen. I mean, who would know that in the basement of this building is an African bazaar? Who would know that the best tea shop in town has no sign? So it's about how do you begin to daylight those things. And so this is the existing condition of the swap meet and the African bazaar. And this is what it could become. It's the very same situation. You see the swap meet sign on the left. You see the back stairs up to the bazaar on the right. But as you infill it and create this pedestrian alley that is vibrant, it becomes a market, it becomes a cultural placemaking jewel in not only Tukwila, but really the region. So the fascinating thing about it is Andrew looked for precedent. Well, we'll get to that in just a moment. This is how it would look from an aerial. So you see what it is, is the existing buildings are preserved. It's a very economically gentle process because you can infill it with small buildings. It can be done very affordably. And the fascinating thing is it's not really about the building, it's about the activity in front of the buildings that make it so special. This is a plan for what that might look like. It calls out the swap meet, the bazaar, the existing Tukwila Police, what is that called? Neighborhood Center, thank you very much. That would be right here. With courtyard buildings and new buildings that create interior courts, a new little L-shaped street that gives you more frontages. That's one thing, and we'll get to that in a minute, but when you have these very large blocks without smaller streets creating a grid, then there aren't as many opportunities for businesses and residential. So as you begin to break those blocks down, you get more development potential. And then the pedestrian alley, even though it's fairly linear in nature because the buildings are offset, it creates that really kind of funky sort of organic, maybe even European sort of shopping street. So this is the back of that building right now. And you can see it's just a very simple block structure, typical alley condition, one might say completely without charm. But you know what's really fascinating is Andrew's prototype is actually Post Alley and Pike Place, right? Okay, so if you look at these buildings, they're also very simple back alley buildings. I mean, there's nothing exciting about the architecture, but what's exciting is in this situation is the produce, the products that are showcased on the alley, the activity, the lighting, the signage. So very, very affordably, you can begin to change that entire environment. And this is the front side of that street. So this is the existing little store on the corner. Can someone tell me what it's called? Southtown Auto. Okay, so with its interesting cant and the fact that it's fairly close to the sidewalk, it actually has good urbanism. And then right next to it is the police station. Neighborhood, thank you. Obviously, I have a poor short-term memory. And so Andrew's showing how you maintain your buildings that you have that have good urban form. The buildings that are out near the street, you encourage them to repaint, have new signs, and very affordably, they can become an active part of your street scene. And then with this canted area here, it's an ideal location for a sidewalk cafe, for a coffee shop, for any number of uses that might enjoy sidewalk seating. And Andrew has transformed the fairly opaque frontage with windows and being able to have transparency and eyes on the street and all of the things that begin to make the neighborhood vibrant. So then behind that you can see infill with a 3-story building that could be residential or office over retail. Now the other really great thing about this illustration is it also shows you the reconfiguration of the street. In this instance, it's a painted bike lane outside of the parking. These could easily be reversed as well, but it's one travel lane in each direction with a lane in the middle for turning or median as you have now. So the one thing about this solution that Paul proposed is it doesn't move the curbs. So it's a very affordable way to change the environment of your street. It's just done with paint. Only paint. So it's incredibly affordable. It's when you move the curbs that things begin to become quite expensive. So another thing you told us was improve the safety of the station. The kids who participated the first night talked about their sense of trepidation when they're at the station in the evening. The parking lot, the empty parking lot is fearful, even though there's lots of collaboration between the city and transit, and policing it can still be a little intimidating. And so you told us to improve the station and also pedestrian safety in general. So because of that, Andrew and Fick looked at what might one do to improve this situation. Right now, it's a very large and heavily used parking lot and a station, but it's a single-use destination, and in the evening, it can have some questionable activity. So the thought that occurred to Andrew is, let's do what many other stations in Seattle have done, and that is create a TOD and do structured parking, and then you have residential over retail or services, and so you have eyes on the street and eyes on the public realm 24/7. And because of that is one of the best ways to begin to mitigate a crime. So what Andrew's showing here is a transit plaza where the buses can loop around right in front of the station, and then both sides, on either side of it, would be the vertical mixed use that would wrap a parking deck. And here's what that would look like from an aerial, so you can see a little better. Here's the deck with the residential wrapper, the transfer plaza, and another mixed use building to the west. He's also showing infill along the edge of South Center on the north with the remaining surface parking behind. The interesting thing in talking to transit is they said it was a very compelling idea. And since they own the property, it's a potential for them to consider redevelopment. And they actually seem to be, I mean, it's a long-term plan, but they were very supportive of the idea, which was encouraging. So this is what the plan would look like. Here's the plaza, the station, and then the two wrappers. And what it's showing is the potential to cut through to the north. And this is one of the ways in which you might begin to break down your block structure. Anytime that large-scale development happens, you could ask for connectivity. And because you're giving additional development potential, it becomes an asset both to the private sector and the public sector. So how do we get it done? I mean, those are some beautiful plans, right? It was funny at one of our focus group meetings on transportation, I was showing some pictures, and a participant in the crowd said, "Well, it's easy to draw a drawing." Well, it's not so easy to draw a drawing, but it is. It's harder to get it done. So there's some simple steps, basically 3. The first one is it could be done, the mayor said, within a year. It could be done, if all goes well, it could at least be started in 2017, and that is a restriping. And that really is the catalytic project that incentivizes almost everything else. The second one is code amendments. Right now there are multiple zoning designations along the corridor, and you can achieve a whole lot, and you guys are really good at development agreements. But the interesting thing about development agreements is they are a little unpredictable. I mean, you all are very, very good at making those successful. But for the investor to be able to know ahead of time what the potential is on the site, that's a huge incentive for them to commit to a project here. So we're recommending that you develop a new zoning district for TIB that will definitely protect the single-family residential behind it. We're working on some step-down regulations that I'll talk about in a moment. But that gives additional incentive to redevelopment. Redevelopment's a hard job. It's costly, it's time-consuming, and it's unpredictable. So you really have to begin to make developers and builders interested in coming to your community by what you give them in advance. And then the third thing is, how do you do the incremental piece? How do you do the little things up front to begin to build the interest? Because you don't get the big jobs like the transit center immediately. So the first thing is the restriping. And Paul has done a map, which is up here on this table. It's too big to put on the wall. And you can see locations for one thing that was really critical is not only the stripes from 5 to 3, but also additional pedestrian crossings. That's something we heard the first night, is it's almost impossible to cross the street. If you're trying to create a retail environment, you need to be able to do cross-shopping for it to be successful. And so the best rule of thumb on pedestrian crossing is every 3 to 350 feet. So that would have to be something that would be phased in over time, but Paul's working with your Public Works and Engineering on the recommendation for crossings. Additionally, he's making some recommendations for if this is a, well, I'll show you. If from here to here is the restriping, how do you begin and end it? How do the bike lanes feed into your existing bicycle network so that there are ways to get on and off of the boulevard? And so all of that is being worked out with engineering. The second thing is the code changes, and Lynn Richards, the CEO of CNU, has been working very diligently on how you can do this incrementally, and she put these slides together for us, which I feel very honored to have had her actively participating. So the one thing about code changes that you guys have already been working on, which is really impressive, it's what are the usual barriers to code reform? And number one is if it's a massive project, if it's a total rezoning, it's expensive and it's complicated. You start to look at non-conforming uses, you start to look at public engagement issues. It requires usually a lot of time and a lot of political will and almost uniform public buy-in. And those are really difficult hurdles normally to code reform. So what is the cycle of incremental change? And this is a really great graphic because it shows from business as usual to a full new zoning district. And the thing that I loved about working with you all is you have done so many steps in your code already, not only for this district but for other districts, that it really makes code reform here a much easier process than it is in most places. So the first thing you normally do is develop progressive standards for parking, frontages, use forms, signage, and there's a list of issues. The fascinating thing is you've already done some of that for the boulevard itself. You've also done a significant amount of it for downtown. So the second thing is to test the changes in urban standards. And that's what you're doing in your urban center zone already. So the lovely thing for the boulevard is we're able to harvest a lot of the work that you've already developed, you've already got public buy-in for, your elected officials know how it works, so it's not reinventing the wheel. So you can get to an entire new zoning district without as many hurdles and as much time as most municipalities. And so there are some things, these are the things that are usually the biggest changes, and they're the recommendations that we're making for TIB, and the first one is parking standards. When you're dealing with the massive amounts of early, mid-20th century parking regulations that are required in a commercial corridor, I mean, you guys are like every other place we work, and that is parking requirements are too much. And so to take parking from being an environmental problem, an economic development problem, and basically a tremendous asset that you're giving away for free, to take that to make it an economic driver, a benefit to retail, something that can build value rather than detract from value, that is the first recommendation. So we'll take A lot of the parking standards you've already built for the urban center and apply them here. In addition, we'll have all of this new on-street parking from the restriping that can count toward the required parking for the parcels. So that's as though the city has given, this bank of parking to the adjacent properties already for public use. And that really is a tremendous asset. The second issue is what we call frontage standards. And this is typical, this is here, in which your frontage is parking. You all have already developed in your urban center and even along TIB standards for building to the back of the sidewalk. Not only we'll take those and then we'll take it one step further, we'll add glazing standards, the percentage of clear glass, the types of awnings and arcades and canopies that are recommended depending on the type of use. We can give very clear and coherent standards for frontages that assure the buildings are an asset to the community and it doesn't have to be negotiated through design guidelines. And then the third thing in particular that we're going to make a major recommendation on is use. Lynn had this awesome photo of typical highway commercial uses, and it's your base zoning districts, your regional commercial and neighborhood commercial have this very same problem that the by right use is commercial, and anything else has to be negotiated. If you want to add residential, it has to be above the first floor, and it's not permitted by right. And you can get to it like you've done at Tukwila Village, but it takes negotiation. So like some of your wonderful corridors in the Seattle region, we will be encouraging you to consider residential by right. A big question that's come up because of your problems historically with the motels on TIB is the issue of lodging. Even though it's a tremendous economic boon this close to the airport to use a lodging base, if we do use that on TIB, we'll have to be very cautious about the type of lodging, and we can be very explicit with numbers of rooms, food service required, and there are just some real basics that feed into lodging types that will assure you a business class hotel. So we can definitely be more explicit about the uses that you've had historic problems with. But in general, we're going to recommend that you consider the by right use of residential. And then I want to talk a little bit about transitions. This is from a Phoenix code, so the heights are all wrong. But we're working on, with your sun angles, on recommendations for how you transition from the corridor to the single-family neighborhoods. You can do it a number of different ways. You can do it through sun angles and step backs, or you can do it through building type. Lori Volk, the woman who is doing the housing study, she found that there's a very large demand for fee simple or ownership townhouses that is underserved here in Tukwila. And if you do even a 3-story townhouse with tuck under parking, a 3-story transition to the single family residential is a very good neighbor that protects people from solar shadows, and it's a like use. It's a medium density residential across from a low density residential. So instead of sun angles, we may use something like building types to build in your transition zones. And then Lynn did this great sketch, which I think really tells a story of what you've done already and what you can continue to do through this process. We really love you guys because from a coding perspective, there's a matrix on the wall that CNU has developed about zoning interventions at the scale of the place. And so what Lynn's point is, the neighborhood center and the Main Street Center really in form and in intensity are very much the same thing. It's just the fabric in which it's embedded that makes it a different place. And so you take, and then if you multiply these, then you wind up with a downtown or an urban center. And so you guys have already built the regulations that are critical to your urban center. And for us to be able to extrude that and take the applicable form to your Main Street, it's an absolute almost seamless transition. It's not that it's going to be without effort. I'm sorry if I'm making it sound like it's like it's going to be a no-brainer. Your staff's going to shoot me for that. But you have done the hard work already that's going to make it a much easier process than it normally is. And then it's also just easy for you as a community to be able to think of what your vision is for your urban center and realize that this length of corridor for TIB, if we multiplied that, in a larger area, we would wind up with an urban center. And it's just to be able to understand that the regulations that apply to urbanity really are an incremental thing. And you can combine them and come up with these different types of places. So a suburban corridor retrofit really is like a conversion to a Main Street. So then I want to this is starting on the incremental development strategies, and I promise we're almost done. And this is just something for you that helps you visualize. Steve Muzon did these studies that show the Portland block, which is 200 by 200 roughly, the Seattle block, which is 330 to 350 by 330 to 350. And then the Tukwila, the average Tukwila block, which is 660 by 1320. So you guys basically have, your single block is 2 blocks wide and 3 blocks deep relative to Seattle. So what this means is you have a whole lot of land you haven't developed yet. Okay, so that's a good thing. You have room to grow, but you can't get to that land until you build some streets. So that is the hard part. That's the big issue. And there was a guy whose name is Sloan Dawson from Sound Transit who was here at one of our meetings, and he did the sketch for us, which he just did it randomly sitting at the table looking at the map, about how your 660 block, if you subdivide it with a 60-foot right-of-way, which actually is a little big, but if you subdivide it, then you get 2 300-foot blocks on either side, and that is with an alley behind. That's the perfect depth for townhouses, which is your missing middle. It's basically the middle density housing type that you guys don't have right now. You don't have much of, and what you have is very successful. So it's your geometry is in place. It's just a matter of dividing it up in a rational manner. So Steve did a number of these illustrations, which you can see in more detail on the wall, which show how you can develop incrementally. Because you're not going to get a lot of big projects immediately. You know how long it took for Tukwila Village. That's a big deal. So what do you do with your parking lots in the meantime? Well, the first step is super simple. You probably didn't even see that happen. But it's just a little plaza and a tree and a food truck on the corner. It begins to create energy, it draws people, and it starts to activate the street. And it's essentially what Portland has done with all of their downtown parking lots. So the next thing you do is you line the whole frontage. And then all of a sudden from the street, even though they're tiny little pods, it becomes an active frontage. And right now you already have a demand. Your high school kids filled out a survey of what they wanted to see on TIB, and one of the things that they said is the opportunity for entrepreneurial small restaurants. And so you already have a really great collection. We have had some of the best food ever this week, eating all of your wonderful cultural options here in town. So food trucks should be a no-brainer. And then, as development comes in the form of maybe live works or small cottages, and this is all envisioned as being modular or temporary, so it's just a placeholder. And then as it upgrades, the food trucks can move around and begin to hold the other side. In Portland, some of those downtown blocks, they still use the interior of the block for parking, and it's just the edges that are activated by the trucks. So you can begin to get even temporary two-story cottages that serve as live works until such time as you begin to build the density that will support a greater retail program. So a lot of people have asked us about the Justice Center, and should it be or should it not be on TIB? You are getting ready to embark on a large process of site location and public engagement, and this is not a part of that. But someone did ask us, I believe it was the chief, ask us, how could the Justice Center be a good neighbor? And it actually can. And one of the first, Steve also illustrated this. This is the 330 block. And this essentially is the footprint size for the police and the emergency services. We would recommend that you probably would want to build two different facilities, one for the courts and one for the police, just so that they aren't immediately adjacent to each other, because you want residential to keep the street active. The mayor even asked the chief if he would consider a coffee shop in the corner of the police station to start to activate the street. And your very progressive chief said, of course. So, congratulations, sir. So anyways, Steve drew a two-story Justice Center with glazing, and so it would be office above, and it could have some opportunity for a cafe or coffee shop on the first level, and I know it's a stereotype, but maybe a donut shop. It does. There is parking in the middle of the block and parking on all of the streets. So actually this has enough parking available that on the back side of the block you can have a double loaded apartment, two-story apartments.
Parking that the police need.
Yep.
Because they need their patrol cars probably not on the street.
No, it's in the middle of the block. If you look at the drawing up close, you can see all the parking spaces and the yeah. So this is how it might look from the street with the apartments behind and the Justice Center in the front, and then looking at it from the apartments back toward the Justice Center. So Steve did some great models just to show that from an urban perspective that the Justice Center actually could be a very good neighbor. And then this is one final drawing from Steve that begins to show, he was rushing madly to finish it, and so I grabbed it at the last second, and it's to begin to show the transition of the townhouses from the main street down to the residential, and to show how that step down could occur. Here's how those townhouses look up close. Now, the interesting thing about these is they're designed as what we call a muse unit. So essentially, on the front side, this is a little rear lane for both sides. On the front side, they face the street, and on the back side, the ones in the rear would face a lane, which also gives you, the ones in the rear wind up being more affordable, but they're also more quiet. So there are assets to being in either unit. So I just want to remind you, this is my last slide before I turn it over to Maura. I want to remind you about CNU. It's coming up May 3 through 6. Thank you, Mayor, very much for mentioning that in the beginning. This report will be delivered to the city at that point in time. There will be a wonderful ceremony, and there will be opportunity for discussion. We'd love it if you came. And it's more than just the Tukwila report, although that's critically important. I mean, you guys are so far ahead of the curve on your understanding of urbanity and what city building is all about. And so I think you would find the CNU in general to be a tremendous resource. There are lots of sessions on cultural diversity, on suburban poverty, on some of the things you're already working very hard on. And you have council people that will be participating. And we just really strongly encourage you to come. We're very grateful to be in your region and really look forward to coming back for that. So I believe, Maura, is it you?
I think that's it.
Okay, so I'm going to just say there's some next steps.
Not her last slide.
Yeah, no, this is your last slide.
Oh, my last slide, okay.
Okay, so there is transportation study that will have to be done, as the mayor mentioned earlier, prior to doing restriping, to make sure all the traffic counts work and that we're not making your life too big of a headache through this process. And then the restriping, the code development, probably, we will make a first draft of the zoning code for you that will be a part of the report. And then finally, you know, my guess is, knowing how fast you guys work and how far ahead of the curve you are, you could be to some sort of rezoning by the end of the year. Anyway, I just want to say again, I really don't, I hope you know how special you are. You know, I mean, really. You guys are pretty awesome, and it's been a super pleasure working with you. We feel really honored to have been a part of your process, and we're very grateful to Lynn and CNU for letting us assist. So thank you. And thank you so much for having us. It's been a wonderful place, and your staff has been awesome, and we've really felt at home here. Thank you.
Everybody's welcome tomorrow.